So, we're thinking about how we make a difference in our front lines. We're thinking about how we demonstrate God's love to those around us. And I said earlier that grace is God's gift to us that we can't earn, because grace means getting what we don't deserve. It is unmerited, unearned and unconditional. I think we've got a slide with that on. It's what we don't deserve. And grace can actually be quite a hard thing for us to accept. We learn from an early age that you don't get something for nothing. There is no such thing, we're told, as a free lunch. We learn from an early age that there is action and there is counteraction, or there is action and there is consequence. When we're little, if we do something wrong, we expect to get punished. When we work, we get paid. That's how it works. If we do wrong, we get punished. That's justice. We get what we deserve. But grace is a problem, because grace doesn't work like that. Grace is a problem because actually, as well as being unmerited, unearned, undeserved, grace is unjust. That's what everybody gets worked up about. When Jesus tells his parable in Matthew 20 about the workers in the vineyard, he tells a story about these workers who turn up for work, and some of them are put to work at the beginning of the day, and then the owner of the vineyard goes back again throughout the day and gathers in more workers, and at the end of the day he gets a group of workers who come and they only do 1 hour's work, and everybody is paid the same. Those who've slaved all day are paid the same as those who turn up at the end and work for an hour. And there's uproar. This is not fair, they say. This is unjust. And they're right. It's not justice, it's grace. The workers who worked all day get what they were promised. The workers who turn up for the last hour get grace. Grace might not sit well with us because it goes against the way we are told the world works. And it goes against the way that we want the world to work. Often, we want people to get what they deserve when they mess up, don't we? Or we begrudge people who get things that they haven't worked for and they haven't earned. When Jonah, the prophet of the whale fame, goes to Nineveh and preaches, he gets upset because he tells them they're about to get what's coming to them, and then they don't, because God lets them off the hook, because God gives them grace. And Jonah complains that it isn't fair and it isn't just. But it is gracious. Because the kingdom of God is a kingdom of grace. It doesn't make sense to the world. And in fact, I think it doesn't make sense to us unless we've received grace ourselves. I think grace is something that we only begin to understand when we've experienced it. If you've had something that you didn't deserve, or you've been let off something where you did deserve something and you were let off, you begin to understand what this grace thing is all about. It doesn't really make sense to somebody who hasn't received grace themselves. We understand it when we receive it. When without earning it or without deserving it, when we've fallen short of the mark, when we've messed everything up, against all reason, God pours out his love on us anyway. We begin to understand what grace is about. The people who get grace the most are the people who most understand their need of it. Grace is unconditional and it's unearned. And grace doesn't do deals. We've got this up as well. Grace doesn't do deals. We don't earn our way into God's favour. You might remember the story of Nicodemus. John chapter 3. Nicodemus, the upstanding member of society. Nicodemus, the religious leader. Nicodemus, a good guy, who comes to Jesus in the middle of the night to talk to Jesus. And he comes to Jesus because, despite being a good guy, living a good life, being a pillar of society, upstanding person, probably got an MBE, because despite all of that, he comes to Jesus because he realises something is missing. He comes to Jesus and he says, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? What do I have to do to get this deal that you're offering, this eternal life? Jesus says, you can't do anything. Nicodemus kind of says, well, what's the deal then? And Jesus says, there is no deal. This is a gift to be received. Jesus says to Nicodemus, you've got to be born again. Think about that for a moment. How much does a baby have to do with its own birth? Absolutely nothing. They just receive the gift of life. Grace is like that. Grace doesn't do deals. It's a free gift. But we resist that a bit, don't we? Because we feel like I've got to do something. I've got to earn it. I've got to be in a place where God is happy enough with me that he can give me this stuff and I'll feel all right about it because I'll feel like I've put the effort in. When we realise that we can't earn God's grace, we begin to understand it. And when we begin to understand it, then we can start to demonstrate it to other people. Last week, if you were here, we were thinking about making good work, the second M. And when I was talking about this in the morning, I was talking about Genesis 1 and 2, right at the beginning of the Bible, and how God invites us to be partners with him in his work. And in the beginning, his work is making the world and then bringing the world to a point where it grows and it flourishes. And God invites us in the beginning of the Old Testament to be partners with him in his work, to care for creation and help it flourish. Skip forward to the beginning of the New Testament, and in Matthew 9 and 10, there's a new invitation to partner with God in his work. The work has changed a little bit. Jesus has focused down the work from getting creation to flourish. Now Jesus is about bringing in people who've missed the point. Healing the sick, teaching people, reminding people about the love of God. That's what Jesus is up to in the first chapters of Matthew. And at the end of Matthew 9, we see him doing that. At the beginning of Matthew 10, Jesus invites us to join in the work. Just as in the Old Testament, God has said, come and partner with me in this work. Now Jesus makes a new offer. Come and partner with me in this new work. It's going to be a joint project between God and you. And Jesus sends out his disciples in Matthew 10. He gives them authority to do all the things that he's done, and he sends them out to continue his work. And he says to them, in effect, be people of grace. Matthew 10:8, Jesus says, remember, freely you have received. In other words, you've had God's gift and you've done nothing for it. Freely give. Freely you have received, freely give. You've had God's grace for nothing. Now give God's grace out for nothing. We're called to be people of grace. So what does it look like, this grace? this undeserved grace, this unmerited grace. Well, another way to think about grace is on our third point. Grace doesn't have to, but it does. Jesus doesn't have to do a whole load of things. He doesn't have to heal Simon's mother-in-law when he turns up at the house and she's sick, but he does. Nobody asked him to, but he does. He doesn't have to heal the man at the pool who can't be quick enough to get into the water. The man doesn't ask him to, but Jesus does. Jesus doesn't have to turn the water into wine. He doesn't have to go to Zacchaeus' house for tea, but he does. Jesus doesn't have to die on the cross, but he does. In the story of the Good Samaritan, nobody has to help the man who's been beaten up and is lying by the side of the road. There are no rules that say they have to, and there's no incentive to do so. It's not going to benefit them to help this man by the side of the road. They don't have to do it. And because they don't have to do it, two of them don't. It's worth just stopping and thinking about those two people that don't, and thinking, what stops us sometimes from ministering love and grace? Is it because we don't have to do it? Is it because there's no incentive to help other people, to show grace and love to other people? Is it because of fear? Is it because of pride? Is it because we're not sure how to act? Is it because we're too busy? Priest and the Levite are on their way somewhere, they're busy people, got loads of stuff to do. Are we too distracted by other things? They don't have to, so they don't. The Samaritan doesn't have to, but he does. He stops and helps, and that is grace. Reading that we heard from Matthew 25, those are examples of grace as well. Visiting the sick and those in prison, clothing the naked, feeding the hungry. Nobody has to do those things. There's maybe not much incentive to do those things. Nobody has to do those things, but when you choose to, that's grace. Grace doesn't have to, but it does. People of grace don't have to, but they choose to. I want to share a story with you. This is one of my favourite stories of grace. I've shared it here before, probably in a previous themed preaching series, but it's worth sharing again. This is the story about the Baptist pastor, Tony Campolo, and a time when he found himself in a small diner in Honolulu in the middle of the night. And it was a pretty grim place. And after a while, a group of people come into this diner where he's getting some food. And this group of people, this group of women that come in are clearly prostitutes. And they sit down at either side of him. And they begin having a conversation kind of across him. And they're talking. And it turns out that one of them has a birthday the next day. "So what?" says her friend. "What do you want me to do? Get you a cake or sing happy birthday?" The first woman responds, "Come on, you don't have to be so mean. I was just telling you that it's my birthday. Why do you have to put me down? You don't have to do anything. I don't want anything from you. Why would you give me a birthday party? I've never had a birthday party in my whole life. Why should I have one now?" And Tony Campolo made a decision. When the women left, he said to the guy behind the counter, "Does that woman come in here every night?" "Yes," said the man, "that's Agnes. She comes in every night. Why do you want to know?" And Tony said, "Because tomorrow is her birthday. What do you say you and I do something about that and we throw her a party right here tomorrow night?" So next night comes and word gets around, and Tony recalls how the place is absolutely packed. Wall-to-wall prostitutes and one Baptist pastor. When Agnes comes, there is cake and everybody sings happy birthday. And she is so moved that she cries. And she actually runs out because she wants to tell her family what's happened. Tony suggests praying for her, and after they pray, the man behind the counter says, "Hey, you never told me that you were a preacher. What kind of church do you belong to?" And Tony Campolo says the answer that all of us preachers wish we have on the top of our head. He said, "I belong to a church that throws parties for prostitutes at 3:30 in the morning." And the man behind the counter sneered and said, "There is no church like that. But if there was, I would be there in a heartbeat." That is a story that is about ministering grace and love. But it's also a story about fruitfulness on the front line. That diner that night became Tony Campolo's front line. God put him in a place where he was going to meet people who did not know the love of Jesus. Perhaps some of the least likely people to wander into a church and ever hear it here. God put Tony Campolo in that place where they could hear the love of Jesus through a simple act of kindness. And it bore fruit because that act of love and grace got people interested in the church and asking questions about, well, what kind of church is this? And it got people praying in that diner. Grace doesn't have to, but it does. Grace takes the initiative. Grace is proactive. And it's also at times costly and inconvenient. Grace is costly and inconvenient. It was inconvenient and costly for the Samaritan to look after that man. He had to go out of his way. He had to pay the innkeeper. He had to come back and reimburse the innkeeper. Costly and inconvenient. It was inconvenient and costly for Tony Campolo to throw a party in the middle of the night for a prostitute. It was inconvenient and costly for Jesus to die upon the cross. Ministering love and grace is costly and inconvenient. Calling round to see somebody who's poorly or going to visit somebody in hospital is not convenient. It takes a special trip. It takes time out of our day. It disrupts what we might have been doing. Making a meal for somebody who's having a hard time, as well as making a meal for ourselves and our family, is costly and inconvenient. Having somebody to stay at your house who needs a place to stay can be costly and inconvenient. We had a friend at college who trained with me and had a bit of a crisis of faith, dropped out of Anglican ministry, needed to get her head together. She came and stayed at our house because we said, look, come and stay with us for a while. She stayed with us for a year. It was costly and inconvenient and also wonderful, but costly and inconvenient. Ministering grace and love is costly and inconvenient. And it's about changing our attitude so that we begin to worry less about whether something is costly and inconvenient and more about whether it's an opportunity to show grace. This week, our challenge is to show grace and love on our front line, to look for opportunities to show grace, to look for opportunities to embrace the inconvenient and costly grace in the way that we treat others. So let me give you some possibilities this week. Maybe you regularly go to the supermarket. We tend to go at different times whenever we've run out of food, and we just go and buy that thing and come back. But some people, and that'll be some of you here, will probably go to the supermarket at the same time every week, week after week. My mum goes every morning on Wednesday at 8 o'clock to Sainsbury's, and she knows the people on the tills at Sainsbury's. She knows some of the customers because she's there every week. And maybe some of you, that's your rhythm. And maybe when you go to the supermarket, you're not always in a hurry and you've got a little bit of time. And maybe for you this week, going to the supermarket won't be about running in and out. It won't be about speed and convenience. It'll be an opportunity to minister love and grace to some of the people that you see when you go to the supermarket. Maybe it'll be a change of attitude so that on the way to the supermarket, instead of thinking about rushing in and out and what you've got to do afterwards, you'll be praying, Lord, give me an opportunity this week while I'm here at the shopping supermarket to show love and grace. Maybe that will be something that you say to somebody who's in the queue. Maybe it'll be a conversation you get into with the assistant in the queue. Maybe it'll just be some other kind of act that you can do, letting somebody go ahead of you, or paying for somebody who's rushed in and realizes they haven't got their card with them. It could be anything, but maybe that for you this week could be a place where you can minister love and grace. Maybe it might be when you're waiting at the bus stop. If you're one of those people who gets the bus, maybe again you're regularly at the same bus stop, getting the same bus with the same people. And maybe this week your opportunity to minister love and grace will be listening to somebody as they pour out their troubles, or offering to pray with somebody, or just comforting somebody who's there at the bus stop and needs somebody to listen to them. Listening is such an important thing that we can offer. Maybe it will be taking a neighbour for coffee or buying them lunch. Maybe it will be a surprise gift. I want to challenge you this week to do something, to think of something you might be able to do on your front line this week that will minister love and grace. What small act of love and grace can you do this week? I want to refer you back to that passage from 1 Peter 4. I don't know if we can put it up, Tom. But I'm going to read it, and I'm going to read it in a different version. You've got it there. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable without complaining. Be good stewards of the grace of God. Serve one another with whatever gift God has given you. Let me read it to you in a different version. Everything in the world is about to be wrapped up, so take nothing for granted. Stay wide awake in prayer. Most of all, love each other as if your life depended on it. Love makes up for practically anything. Be quick to give a meal to the hungry, a bed to the homeless. Be generous with the different things God gave you, passing them around so that everyone gets in on it. If it's words, let it be God's words. If it's help, let it be God's hearty help. That way, God's bright presence will be evident in everything through Jesus, and he'll get all the credit as the one mighty in everything. Encores to the end of time. Oh, yes. I want to give a moment for us to think about what we might do this week to minister love and grace, and to think about our front lines this week, the places where we're going to be, where we might bump into people who don't yet know God, and what we might do. And I want to give you an opportunity to pray and ask God for that opportunity. So we're just going to have a few moments where we're going to watch a video. Well, it's a song, but it's on the video. And I just want to encourage you in that song, just to sit and listen to it, and just to ask God for opportunities this week on your front line.